You know, as a policeman, I always knew where the high crime areas were located. Well, now there's a way for you to know as well right on your iPhone. It's called Crime in Place. Using current FBI data, Crime in Place steers you away from the places you don't want to be, and it works anywhere in the country. So before you go down the street or out of state, go to crimeinplace.com and get your free download of Crime in Place. Stay aware, stay safe with Crime in Place.
Hey, Sean.
Hey, buddy.
Hey, I like Crime in Place.
Big fan.
You know what they're using? They're using maps to kind of find out where you can be safe, right?
That is exactly what they're doing.
Well, that's kind of interesting. What if you were, let's say you used to be a police officer.
Uh-huh.
You used to be a police officer.
Once
right?
upon a time.
Yeah. So let's say that you were able to find a software that would help you find someone who was doing serial crimes in your area. Like you put in, I don't know, you had a guy in your area that was doing serial burglaries.
Okay.
You put all of the burglaries in. This software looked at that data with the help of a skilled detective, was able to tell you in a general area of where that person lived. Would that be beneficial?
There's a lot of police departments that are doing that. It's modern day policing. We call it cops on dots.
Cops on dots?
Cops on dots, yeah.
I haven't heard of this concept. Yeah. Well, our guest today is one of the pioneers in this.
Oh.
His name is Kim Rossmo, and he is currently an ex-detective with the Vancouver Police Department, as well as a current instructor in criminology at the University of Texas. I know it's Texas, but it's still pretty good. Sean being a big Oklahoma fan,
Sooner.
yeah, we have a little problem with that.
Actually, let me just say I'm Texas State University. So.
Okay, yeah, okay, we're good then. Yeah, we're good.
Better.
And when we say Vancouver, are we talking Vancouver here in the States or across the border Vancouver?
Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada.
Okay, all right, yeah.
So you know what we like to do on here when we're talking about cops on dots?
We're going to have a good drink.
Yeah.
Well, we try to have a good drink. We've had some bad ones, Crown Apple, but we've had some pretty good ones.
You know, sir, can you tell us what we're going to have to drink tonight?
You're going to have some good bourbon.
Yes, we're going to have good bourbon. Tonight we picked a bottle of Heaven Hill Bottled and Bond 100 proof. This was some good stuff made right in Kentucky. It's our favorite. We're going to pour this to you in honor of all your service and all of your dedication to helping stop crime.
Got to take care of Jason Sales.
We got Jason over here. He's always with us over here, making sure that we stay safe as well.
With Crime in Place.
Here you go, sir. Here's a toast to you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you, Kim. Cheers to you, Jason.
So, Kim, tell us about your history.
Well, I was a member of the Vancouver Police Department in Canada for just over 20 years. When I joined, I had a bachelor's degree, but I was interested in pursuing my graduate education, which I did at Simon Fraser University in their School of Criminology. So I would, walk a beat in Skid Row, spend a lot of time there, and then go up to the ivory tower of academia. For my doctoral research, I was very interested in exploring an area that's called environmental criminology. So environmental criminology is interested in less so in why does someone commit their crimes, but in where and when and how they commit their crimes. In other words, the influence of the environment on their crime patterns. And a lot of that work was sort of in the field of crime prevention. I was interested in criminal investigations. So I ended up doing some research on serial criminals, where they committed their crimes, how they committed their crimes, when, and applying some of the models, crime pattern theory by Branningham and Branningham, or a couple of famous professors there. And my goal was to develop an algorithm or a model which could take a look at the locations where the connected crime series have occurred, and then figure out where the offender was most likely based. So let's say you've got 12 serial rapes in a city like Lafayette, Louisiana. I think there was 14 serial rapes in that case, Southside rapist. They go into the computer system and we analyze them. The computer will do lots of calculations. In the end, it just produces a map showing the most likely area where the offender will be. Now, it's not an X that marks the spot. What it is kind of a search strategy. And I want to be clear about something. We don't solve crimes with this. You can only solve a crime with a witness, confession, or physical evidence. What this does, though, is allow detectives to be much more efficient at prioritizing suspects and focusing their limited resources. So, we play sort of a supporting role for them.
Well, let me ask you this question. You alluded to the Lafayette case. Can you kind of give us the backstory on this and tell us a little bit about this case and how you worked with them in order to apprehend the perpetrator?
Sure. So some years ago, I was contacted by Detective Mac Gallion, who eventually we became friends and still talk. And Gallion was working on a series of rapes, I think approximately 14 rapes that had occurred on the south side of Lafayette, Louisiana. And he had read something, an article that was published in Police Chief magazine, a magazine put out by the IACP, the International Association of Chiefs of Police. Wanted to know maybe this geographic profiling technique could help him in this case that he had literally for years, and wasn't going very far.
So how long had these rapes been going on? You say for years, like 2 years, 3 years, 5?
I think more like over a decade.
Okay, gotcha.
And there have been some gaps in there. The FBI have been brought in and they helped establish like what we call a linkage analysis, which crimes are linked. In some cases, that's clear because you got DNA evidence, but in other cases, it's more of a subjective behavioral analysis. So Mac had these known cases, and I said I would help him. They flew me down there, and we went and looked at the crime sites. We looked at them in the daytime to see them. We looked at them in the nighttime because that's when they were happening. And in the end, everything got put into the computer system. And I produced a report with some maps that I sent to Mac. Now, it was kind of interesting because offenders tend to operate in areas that are their comfort zones. But this particular offender had crimes in a number of different areas, like rich neighborhoods, apartments, single family homes. And I sort of thought, he's got what we would call a well-developed mental map. He's all over the place and he's comfortable in those places. So I was wondering maybe a taxi cab driver or a delivery person. Anyways, Mac had something like 1,000 suspects, and many of them he'd already DNA'd. I've got DNA samples from. He used the profile to focus on the remaining suspects. And while he was doing that, a new tip came in for a person. Mac looked at where that person was residing, and he was, maybe in the top general 8% of the area, which is pretty good. But Mac was a very thorough detective. So he said, well, just a second. It's not where the guy's living today. It's where he was living when the rapes were happening. So he checks into his personnel file, or he talks to where this person works, and they look in the personnel file. And at the time of the rapes, he was living like right in the dab center of everything. So now Mac is very interested. He obtains a discarded cigarette butt through some covert activities, which they submit to the lab. Bingo, they got a DNA match.
Wow.
And they go and arrest the person who eventually was given multiple life sentences after conviction. But the interesting thing is the offender was a sergeant in the sheriff's department.
Oh, dang. So he could go anywhere just comfortably.
Yeah, he was familiar with a lot of neighborhoods. He actually had connections through colleagues with some of the task force investigating the rapes. He joined a gym to lose weight, changed his hairstyle, got new glasses so it wouldn't be a good match for the composite sketch. And one of those other bizarre things that you think wouldn't happen in anything other than a movie. At the time of his arrest, he was engaged to be married to a rape crisis worker.
Oh,
good night.
Really?
And how many cases was he connected to?
I think 14.
Golly. And I'm hoping he's still in prison to this day or under it.
Yeah, that's a life sentence he got.
Absolutely.
So your software kind of narrowed it down to where this guy could possibly be working. What do you take into consideration other than the fact of where the crimes happened? You said you go and look at the scenes of the crimes at day and night. I assume that's because they look quite different, right?
Well, if you've got an offender out hunting in the nighttime, he's going to consider target availability, but he is also going to be concerned about his own protection. So he doesn't want witnesses. But how something looks at nighttime in terms of activity, traffic flow, lighting could be very, very different than how it looks in the daytime.
Gotcha.
But to answer your question, it's the location of the crime that's the single most important. And then the time and date of the crime is the next most important. The rest of it's sort of gravy, stuff that might give us a few other insights into things. For example, in this particular case, one of the theories was that this offender was following victims home from a superstore because a number of them had been to the superstore. But when we actually went and looked at the crime sites, it was so easy because of how the house was positioned to just look in the windows.
Oh.
And we found that over and over again. Offenders are often very cognizant of trying to figure out, is there a dog there? Does a man live there? How many people are there? And they can gain a lot of information just by looking into the window. So, but you don't know that unless you actually go there. Though I will say nowadays with Google Maps and satellite views and street views, you can get a lot of information just from, your computer system.
And I assume that helps you with all that GIS and spatial recognition that's currently out there, kind of helps you overlay with some of your software?
Oh, yeah, that stuff is just advanced leaps and bounds from when I first started this.
Well, what does your data set need to be in order to actually get a pretty accurate profile of where a perpetrator may be?
Just the locations of the connected crimes.
Do you need 2, 3, 4?
I'd like to have 5. It's sort of like anything with probability.
Gotcha.
We like to say you don't know what's going to happen with a given spin of the roulette wheel, but by the fact at the end of the day, the house is going to be making all the money. So sure. It's sort of a matter of increasing confidence the more sites you have. I prefer to have 5. Sometimes you've got a lot, you can start doing multiple types of analyses. So I have a colleague in California who's trained in this method. She had a guy who was literally a couple hundred exposures. And she broke them down by time period and figured out not only where the guy lived, but where he worked and what he liked to do on the weekend. So, because there were different clusters for those.
Well, it seems like that, I mean, yes, you have a degree in criminology, but it seems like you and math are kind of a friend.
So I actually initially started my university education in math and then thought I wanted something with a little more excitement, chasing bad guys, kicking in doors. And that's when I switched to policing.
Those are quite a bit different.
Yes, but then I thought I want to pursue my graduate education. But one of the things about the environmental crim stuff is I knew from my policing is that the one power I kind of have is being at a location at a certain time. So that's what I wanted to do. I have a sister who's a school teacher, and I tell her she'll do more for crime prevention than I ever could have done as a police officer. But as a cop, I can be on a corner at a certain location. I have some influence there. I can see things. So for me, the geography was so critical.
Right. You're going to stop crime as within your touch, to say.
Yeah.
Right? Well, while you were in Vancouver, you kind of worked on a pretty high-profile case that kind of the big brass didn't want to listen to science, it sounds like, which I like science, so I'd listen to science. You want to kind of tell us about that case?
Yeah, that was very tragic. So our department received information from one of the sort of street community liaison offices, and they were saying that there's all these women who are going missing. A lot of them were Aboriginal, First Nations women. They were all what we would call low track street secretary workers. And these people tend to be a little volatile anyways. They move around a lot. But there was over 20 of them. So one of the things when I got this information, I was actually asked by the patrol inspector to try to figure out what was going on. And when I looked at it, and then I got data going back many, many years, 20 years. And I tried to figure out, did this mean, do we have more now than we had before? This is actually what epidemiologists do.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, what's called a spatial temporal cluster. Do we have more outbreaks of tuberculosis in this neighborhood in this time period than we should be having. So I looked at it and found, there weren't a lot of unfound missing people, a couple of years maybe. And then we got to the relevant time period and it just exploded. So I says, well, something's going on here. And any explanation has to account for the fact that it's only women, not men, that we're not finding any bodies, and that this didn't happen before and it's not happening in other Western Canadian cities. And the only theory that made sense to me was a serial killer. So that did not go over well with our major crime department. Our inspector there, he very much resisted the theory. He believed that the women could be found. He had to pursue that, but
to that.
Sorry, why?
What was his big resistance? That he was it kind of one of his ego things? That all right, cop intuition's better than science, that kind of stuff.
Good question. I don't really know, but I think what you're saying played some part of it all. And once someone comes to a decision really quickly, sometimes it's hard to get them to back away. Right. But also a serial killer case is a huge mess. It's going to take up a lot of resources. It's going to upend everything else.
Gotcha.
So that's going to be part of it. And all they did was they found a few more cases to add to the mix. So this thing dragged out for a while. A lot of resistance to the theory. And then eventually the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who do some of the suburb policing, a police officer there had information that led to him getting a warrant for an illegal firearm. He goes to search this farm, it was a pig farm. And inside he found a bunch of identifications for different women who were missing one. And in the end, they spent, I don't know how much money, hundreds of thousands of dollars digging up the farm, just getting bits of bones and a couple of skulls and some teeth. And the guy that did this, Robert Picton, said to an undercover police officer sharing a cell with him that he had done 49, was going to do 50 and take a break.
That's a huge number.
And was feeding them to the pigs.
I think we don't know exactly. We just know that other than the latest ones, there wasn't much left at all, like literally a bit of a bone or tooth. They had conveyor belts going, and they hired dentistry students to just take a look at all the dirt that was, because they dug this whole thing up. It literally took like 2 years or something to search that site. But it was horrible. And the really sad part is that there were probably 14 of those murders that could have been prevented because he was on the radar screen, but there just wasn't the attention. And there was a big commission of inquiry at the provincial level and a lot of stuff going on and civil suits and everything. But the inspector, when he was examined during the commission of inquiry, say, why didn't you pay attention to this? He said, well, that was just intelligence. We don't do investigations on the basis of intelligence. But I'd worked organized crime intelligence, and we did multi-million-dollar investigations on the basis of intelligence, Yeah. Imagine the FBI saying, oh, we had intelligence of this terrorist attack, but we didn't, so that just didn't make any sense.
Obviously, it's a loss of intelligence there, You ain't got no intelligence if you ain't going to do this, huh?
Yeah, in our department, we had a intelligence unit, and that's what their whole job was to, look at bits of information and go, hey, this is something you guys need to look into. And that's the whole purpose behind them.
Yep.
So this was the largest serial killer in Canadian history, correct?
Correct.
What happened to him?
Oh, he eventually was convicted and given life sentences. So that's probably where he will spend the rest of his days.
But did he ever give any reason why he was doing this? Obviously, he was crazy or had some sort of mental health issue or he was psychotic. But
I don't know if he was crazy, but he certainly had, they would call a personality disorder. He might have been psychopathic. I'm not, I don't know about any of the testing they do when you end up in prison. But as far as I know, he has not really said much. We do know that prostitutes would visit him that he wouldn't attack. And others he would. So, it's really unfortunate that we don't put more effort into trying to get these guys to talk. And the FBI have done some research on this, trying to understand what motivates these individuals. But still there's so much to know because they're so bizarre.
Right. Is Navarro the FBI guy that's done most of the research on this stuff?
Well, the original research was done by Bob Ressler and John Douglas. If you ever seen the TV show Mindhunter, it's based on those two guys. I'm attending a session on Thursday where an FBI agent who spoke with Samuel Little, who was that serial killer that was going back and forth across the country just recently and was eventually apprehended by the Texas Rangers. He interviewed him, so he's going to talk about that. So there's, it's ongoing, but yeah, there's still, I'm a big fan of research because research tells us a lot and we can become better at what we need to do, which is, catching these guys quicker.
Right. Just not saving lives is basically what you're doing. Have there been any other cases that really stick in your mind that you're like, hey, we nailed it on this one?
Well, one of my other favorites was in England. I've worked cases literally all over the world and did a number in the United Kingdom. And this was a serial rapist who stole one of the victims' stole a credit card and then used the credit card to make all these purchases. So I thought maybe we can use the credit card locations. And that actually really refined the analysis. They had a partial print, but not enough to search through an AFIS, automated fingerprint identification system. So they decided to do hand searches, like someone literally going through the files. And this was a horrendous amount of work, but the profile helped narrow things down significantly. And they were about to basically stop the investigation because it had been going on for a few years. And that same week, they came up with the right card, and it was a match to the individual who, when they arrested him, confessed, and his DNA was a link. The other interesting thing was if they had come up another way through this, approach it a different way, the person might have been overlooked because he was showing as being in prison at the time of one of the rapes, which would have excluded him. Yep. But because of the fingerprints, that was like, well, no, we're not paying attention to that. Turned out he'd been given an unofficial weekend pass that was never recorded. So, things get a little hazy sometimes and murky.
Different in the UK than we do here. Do you get passes out of prison?
No, they have weekend deals. There are, your lower offender deals. We have a lot of them that are like during the hours of 8 to 5, they're supposed to be at work. And as long as they report back at, 5 o'clock or dinner time or 10 o'clock, they'll have different.
So jail's like a bed and breakfast for them?
Some of them are. Some of them are.
I got you. Well, how did you come about? This is, how many people do this in the world other than you?
So trained to a high level to deal with murder and rape, maybe a dozen, some in England, United States and Canada, but a few hundred trained to work on property crimes and burglaries and robberies and some of those other ones. So, and then, there's often a lot of networking and sharing and collaboration.
Well, you're in a small club then, sir, aren't you?
Relatively, yeah. Fortunately, there's not that many serial predators out there, but there's enough of them. Probably more than we even realize because we don't always connect the dots.
Right.
And I guess that kind of takes me to a question. You say more than we'd realize. All the specials you see on TV, a lot of the serial killers, they kind of cover from the 70s, the 80s. And obviously nowadays technology really helps capture guys. Everything from, as you talked about, AFIS to, we can talk about NIBIN involving firearms. Obviously, everybody's got cell phones, houses with Ring doorbells, cameras on, corners and things like that. And I've actually kind of wondered if those type of crimes, your serial crimes, have actually gone down modern day compared to in the past.
So in the United States and in other countries, England and Canada, for example, murders peaked in 1991, and they've dropped really significantly since then, though they are starting to trend upwards. We'll have to wait and see what happens. So some people have researched serial murder and found the same thing, that it peaked in that period and has been dropping for the last 3 decades. So that's good. We'll see if it stays down. We know historically there are variations. Sometimes seems when you've got a lot of major social unrest, which has occurred, say, in South Africa, in former Soviet Union countries, after World War I and after World War II, the numbers went up. I don't know if the COVID pandemic is going to create some of those same, sort of things. We'll have to wait and see. Well, but murder is rare. What we don't have any shortage of, though, are serial burglars or serial sex offenders, at a lower level. So that type of activity, these people almost their whole lives are spent in criminal activity. I'm sure you've met dozens of people like that. And the interesting thing is, it's generally true that about 10% of offenders do half of the crime.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I remember, I was involved in our gang unit, and I went to some training up in Chicago, and it was actually a very, very good conference, the best one I'd been to. I was fortunate and went to a bunch of them across the country. But there was a statistic that was put up there that, for gang members, like 5% of them, account for like 90, or I think it was like 80% of the violent crime. So there's a lot of guys that I don't want to say play gang members, but they're gang members. They might tote a gun. They're out there selling dope. They're, stealing cars, that type of stuff, but they're not the guys that are out there shooting. And it's this small percentage of guys that account for so many shootings, homicides. And speaking for us, here in Tulsa, that's exactly what it was. You hear the same guys' names over and over that pop up.
You mentioned before dots on maps, that they also find that about 10% or less of the locations the police go to for 911 calls for service generate 40 to 60% of those calls for service, the problem places.
Yep.
So from a criminology standpoint, and you were talking about environmental criminology, how do you make those places better so there's less crime?
You need to problem solve. You need to analyze what's going on. You need to find out what's leading up to this. Sometimes it's not that difficult if you just take a look. In Vancouver, we were having somebody did a study and found that we had a whole lot of stabbings that were occurring in the early morning hours with really drunk victims and offenders. Well, okay. Back that up a little bit. Let's try to keep the knives out of the bars. Let's make sure someone who's in a very bad mood and it's causing problems is held in the drunk tank until the bars close down. Let's make sure we start focusing on the bootleggers who are providing the alcohol for these late night parties. And if we get a disturbance or a fight call, we don't just tell people to be quiet. We send them home. Hey, it's 4 a.m. You're all going now. That type of thing.
Well, it's kind of interesting. You brought up stabbings, and you also brought up the fact that murders have been on a decline. But I think something just recently came out that said 2020 murders are up 30% in the United States.
I know here in Austin that we are heading for a record, unfortunately.
Yeah, it was the highest number, from year to year, comparing 2019 to 2020. Now, the numbers themselves, overall across the country, we're still not at the levels, like you said, in the early 90s when crack cocaine was a major problem and the gang violence that went along with that. But there are a lot of cities across the country that already are, going to surpass probably their record highs. So it's definitely gone up.
Well, like you were saying, there's a correlation after a pretty major event, which I think COVID is a pretty major event. It also said, that study also said that overall crime had lowered, but murders had increased, which always made me think about, people are together and they're getting on each other's nerves and they're in too close a proximity and that stuff's happening. So that kind of data is something that you guys could track pretty easy, correct?
Oh, yeah. In fact, there's people doing it right now, looking at crime, all the different crimes and how they're changing, and doing it by season, every month. So yes, a lot of people are exploring that.
Well, a lot of things because of COVID. I mean, you have to look at things such as larceny is going to be way down because businesses have been closed, so people can't go in and steal. Burglaries in a lot of areas are down because people
are at home.
Yeah, they're not at work. They're working from home. Now, auto thefts went up quite a bit. I know in a lot of places auto thefts was one of those deals that did go up quite a bit.
People ready to get out and about.
Yeah.
We also have the unknowns about the defund the police movement.
Right.
We'll have to see, what that leads to. So The trouble is it's so hard to make accurate predictions. All we can look for are hints of trends and then follow them. And then we realized, oh, well, maybe we should have done something 5 years ago with this.
Well, when we're talking to you, I get this distinct. You kind of remind me of like a bookmaker in Vegas. You're like the criminal bookmaker. So you run all the probability and the odds, and you set it out and said, "Hey, here's the line on crime. This is what we're looking at," and you're just looking at the numbers in order to kind of find out what's going to be best. So.
I think I also, it's always important. Well, I'm going to use my experience, but it's also important to talk to people. So they, let's say I was working a case in Tulsa. Well, I want to be put with someone not only knows the case, but knows the area of the crime. It might be an old patrol sergeant or, someone with a lot of background. So as much as you know, and as much data as you collect, there's always more things to find out, more people to talk to. And that is important in solving a crime. It's important also in research.
Has there been a case that you've been called in that was particularly heinous that you didn't get any resolution on that kind of haunts you a little bit?
So over time, a lot of those have ended up being solved just by luck, but some still remain mysteries. You wonder what happened there. But like I say, over time, a lot of these guys end up things not working out for them. Just a bit of luck or a DNA hit. Probably the one that was, I could say the Zodiac. I was asked to look at Zodiac, but a bigger one for me was the Golden State serial killer in California. And I've been asked by a retired detective didn't want to give up on it, and I did these analyses, and I never thought this goes back in the 70s. I never thought it would be solved. And then the genealogical work and the DNA and a really good crime analyst and a supporting district attorney, they solved it, and the guy got arrested and put in prison. And so that's in any one of these things, unlike what you see on TV, there's usually a dozen or 20 players that have some role in solving the crime. Some more important than others, but it's, you just kind of want to do your part in all of that. And it's really cool when it all works out. And that to me maybe was one of the most puzzling cases I ever had, but that just got solved a couple of years ago.
Well, tell us about that case. I don't know the history of the Golden State Killer. So
it started off, well, the first thing was a series of bizarre burglaries in Visalia, California. And by bizarre, that was like stuff wasn't being stolen. It was personal female stuff that were being looked through. But it ended up with a murder because the offender took a young girl outside into the yard. Father ran out to intervene. He got shot and murdered. There was almost like 90 some of these. Police officer got shot, but fortunately wasn't killed. But then they stopped. Then some months later, a serial rapist, very violent, showed up in Sacramento. East Area Rapist, he was called. Did a lot of rapes, a lot of, and probably a couple of murders there too. Then there's nothing for some years, and a serial killer shows up in Orange County, now murdering people, and no one thought that these groups were connected until DNA matches happened through CODIS. And all of a sudden they're going, oh my God, the original Night Stalker is the East Area Rapist. And there was a number of task forces put together, and eventually somebody decided, let's do a genealogical DNA analysis. And that linked them back. I think they went back like to the early 1800s, and they found, well, we got a match in one of these genealogical databases that people will submit their DNA and try to get their family tree.
Yep.
And they had like 5 or 6 detectives working full time, filling out the family tree. And they ended up focusing, again, partly on location, partly on time, and of course by gender, by sex, on a particular family. The first guy they looked at in that family was in prison during one of the attacks. They looked at the next guy, his brother, and that was the right guy. I think they got a discarded soft drink cup or can, and the DNA matched, and they arrested him.
So what you're telling me is that you smart cops went back through through family trees to find a lineage of a potential suspect now using good old-fashioned science.
Well, DNA, this genealogical DNA has now been used to solve a number of these horrible cases. In this case, the analyst was Paul Holes in the Sacramento area. He had the support, though, of his district attorney. There was task force involved. And so it just was a very interesting, cool application, but it had to be backed up by a lot of work. And they put the effort into it. And we all know that effort, work, and commitment, that stubbornness is what solves a lot of crimes. But science, of course, plays an increasingly important role. You mentioned earlier cell phones. Learning a lot about offenders and cell phones, and sometimes that can be really critical in solving a case. I'm involved with one right now where 2 people were found innocent because of analysis of cell phone activity. So all that information out there, while it sometimes makes you worry a little bit about Big Brother, also has a lot of benefits.
Right, it can tell you where you weren't.
Yeah. Just talking about cell phones. Probably in the last 5 to 7 years of the investigations that the guys in my unit did, I mean, it just became a regular. Almost every open investigation, they were typing ping warrants for phones, to see where they were pinging at. And that's how you're finding out where, we've got a gangster who bounces around from, girl's house to girl's house. We don't know where he puts his head down at night. We know where he hangs out at. We don't know what car he is. But you get his phone and you can type a search warrant, just for a ping warrant. And you start looking and you find this pattern of, all right, 5 nights a week, this is where he spent, within a, sometimes it's like a 400-meter radius. Sometimes it's like a 3-meter radius. And it'll tell you, hey, this is where this guy's, putting his head down at night. And so if you know his car, you start doing surveillance, and then you see him leave it in the morning. And, then you're working search warrants into their houses. And, when these guys are shooting suspects or wanted for robberies and homicides, I mean, just that cell phone is such a great tool that, like I said, 7-10 years ago, we just didn't do that much with.
I've had some success, too, in cases using the location of the nearest cell phone tower for certain calls, kidnappings, for example. Mm-hmm. And then you get a number of these and you can figure out where the guy likely is based or lived, just apply the geographic profiling to that. And that's, I think, one of the interesting things is the integration of the different scientific and analytic techniques.
Yep.
Well, when you're talking about that, I mean, it kind of goes back to the human behavior, as we're all kind of creatures of habit. We like to do our same things. We like our routines. Even if we try to randomize it, it still ends up being similar and stuff. You currently teach criminology, right? So you're teaching criminalists.
So I am a research professor in the School of Criminal Justice and Criminology at Texas State University. So I mainly do research. I supervise some doctoral students. You want to encourage them to do research in this area. I have one doctoral student right now, April Chai, who's studying locations of murder victims' bodies when the offender tries to hide them. So that's going to be very useful. And so, we just want to kind of carry that momentum going. I also do a lot of talking to police groups, district attorneys, other academics, just, sharing the results of the research.
Like you talk to handsome guys that like to have cocktails, like ourselves.
Maybe one with a red beard, maybe one. I mean, Sean, I was looking at you, man. Your coif of hair is beautiful.
Thank you. I was wearing a hat earlier too.
I like that. I like the way that's going.
I got a haircut.
Me and Kim are sharing the same hairdo, so we're a little bit jealous of you, but that's okay.
Rosa at Rock Paper Scissors cuts my hair, and I'll be there, I think, Friday, so it'll look a little better this weekend.
Well, I before we leave, we have about 5 minutes left, and you have a powerful brain, obviously, and you have a powerful computer, and you have a powerful piece of software that you've put into this computer. What's some advice that you can give to our listeners to keep them safe, other than the Crime in Place app?
Well, I think that you just need to be aware of your surroundings. I'll take an environmental perspective. And don't go into the wrong place. Don't hang with the wrong people. Don't do risky things. And sort of just think about those consequences. And, the most part, the newspapers, the media, they sensationalize crime. And for most people, it's not a huge issue. There'll be things like, yeah, my car got broken into. Why? Because you left your car unlocked. So,
Hey, we've talked about that a lot.
You know who's left their fucking car unlocked and gotten their shit stolen? And I'm just cussing to emphasize how ridiculous it is. This guy. It was one of his closest friends is a police officer.
He got my property back for me.
He had like a $4,000 mountain bike unlocked in the back of his vehicle, and it disappeared. What a shocker. But I will say kudos to some very good police work. And you know what? And literally kind of goes back to exactly what you're talking about. We had a bunch of bike thieves going on. So when this happened, I reached out to the group that was investigating those type of crimes. And lo and behold, I'm not joking, it was just a few hours. Literally somebody finds one of these homeless guys riding a $4,000 mountain bike.
Yeah, that wasn't his.
Yeah.
And
here's the best part, I got to say. So it was just kind of off story. But yeah, seriously, good police work by some officers that, just as you talked about, they were familiar with the area. They knew, all right, this is the crime that's happened. Who are our people that are committing this crime? And they go down there, and they did find the mountain bike. So they call me. I holler at Howard to go get his bike back. He shows up down there at the police station.
And they tell me this story.
And to recover his bike, and he gets his bike. He had a very identifiable bike, I guess. It was a one-of-a-kind type of deal.
It's a pimp bike. It's really nice.
But he shows up there, and the suspect is handcuffed, sitting on the bench, wearing one of Howard's hats that was in his van.
Yeah.
And Howard had no idea the hat was missing. He's like, son of a bitch, that's my hat. And the bad guy was still sitting there wearing it the whole time.
Well, and the cop said, he goes, yeah, we saw this guy, and he was obviously on this bike that we kind of had an idea that might be the bike. We follow him in our patrol car. Well, he takes off. And this mountain bike is designed to go off cliffs.
Yeah,
this guy
like Evel Knievel type.
Yeah, this
bicycle.
guy is such a poor bicycle rider that he hits a curb and flies over the handlebars, and he lands in a pile of dog shit. And the cops come up on him and like, just don't get up. When he was sitting there in my hat, he still had dog crap on him. They asked if I wanted my hat back, and I was like, no, I'll just take the bike. I got to stay with him, so. But Kim, we really appreciate you coming on. What you do is fascinating. Before we leave, is there anything that you'd like to close us out on? We got a couple of minutes left.
Well, we talked before. I think you wanted me to just kind of mention some of the other applications of geographic profiling outside of crime. And one of them has been in epidemiology. So the possibilities of applying the same technique to locations of diseases that come from the same source. So we've already done some work on this with cholera, trying to determine the contaminated water source, or malaria, looking at where the mosquito breeding pools are. And of course, one of the big ones that everyone has a lot of questions about is COVID-19, its origins. And I've been working with the Naval Health Research Center in San Diego, trying to put proposals together to get funding to explore that, because still a lot of mysteries about that. And also, I found out during that effort that, this is just one of many of these, what they call emerging infectious diseases. So as we, grow in our population on this planet, we push into forests and wilderness areas, there's going to be more of these zoonotic diseases as a result of animals or insects intersecting with humans. And we want to identify their origins as soon as possible so we can respond a whole lot quicker than we did, this last time and prevent a pandemic from breaking out in the first place. So that's another interesting application that we're currently working on.
Well, there's lots of different organizations that use your software. You want to name a few?
So the last one I heard about the New York Police Department, but ATF, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Scotland Yard, the British National Crime Faculty,
So just small agencies that really don't do much, right?
I haven't heard of any of those.
No. What's this yard place?
Yeah, in New York, never heard of such a thing. Well, Kim, I got to say, we've had a lot of guests on here, and not putting down anybody else, but you are definitely, I think, the smartest guy.
Smarter than Chad Ayers.
That we've had on here by far. So, no, all seriousness, absolutely fascinating work. And, man, really, really appreciate what you're doing out there.
And if you
Thank
ever
you for the opportunity to talk to everyone.
Well, we appreciate it. If there's anything we can ever do for you, you just let us know. Not that you really need our help doing anything.
You can send me a hat.
Oh,
Boom.
we can do that.
We can do that. Actually, quick one question. So all these diseases that are coming out, does good bourbon cure them?
Yes.
Is that a good, like if people consume enough of it ahead of time, does it work like in the prevention mode?
Oh, it does.
I can't say for sure, but I really think it's worth experimenting.
Absolutely. Well, I tell you what, if you get government funding to start such a thing, to look at it, these are we got actually 3 counting Jason right here. We've got 3. We'll be 3 guinea pigs all day.
I look forward to it.
All right, buddy. Sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Cheers.
Good evening.